Good morning. It is 9:01, Wednesday, May 6th. This is the TDN Writers Room presented by Keeneland. My name is Joe Bianca. I'm the associate editor of the Thoroughbred Daily News. Day 53 of lockdown, and I think my plants are starting to move.
Hi, it's Bill Finley on the podcast. And if I don't get to have a haircut pretty soon, I may actually let Alan Carasso mess with my hair. That's how desperate I'm getting.
You do not want that.
Jonathan Green, general manager of DJ Stable. And I was really excited to see that Secretariat won the Triple Crown Challenge. But I am going to wait to name him the horse of the century until the test results come back from the French lab.
It's Alan Carasso, managing editor of the TDN. Good morning, everyone. And Bill, really, you don't want that. So the state of New Jersey, we just announced that kids are going to be home for the rest of the year. So everybody say a prayer for me.
The TDN Writers Room is brought to you by Keeneland. The September yearling sale takes place Monday, September 14th through Saturday, September 26th. Submit final entries to showcase your yearlings at the world's deepest and premier marketplace at september.keeneland.com. Big weekend for Keeneland graduates. Finally had some racing. Both undefeated, Nadal and Charlatan. They split the two divisions of the Arkansas Derby, obviously. Swiss Skydiver, also a Keeneland grad, won the Fantasy on Saturday. Some news this week from Keeneland about digital inspections. On Tuesday, Keeneland announced the introduction of digital inspections for the 2020 yearling sale, 20 September yearling sale. They'll be accessible online for prospective buyers, particularly those whose attendance might be compromised as a result of the limitations surrounding COVID-19. The Keeneland Broadcast Services team will coordinate these digital inspections for all Book 1 and Book 2 yearlings as an enhanced service to breeders and consigners, and their Broadcast Services team will also provide support to sellers of yearlings in Books 3 to 6 who wish to record videos or capture yearling or photos of yearlings independently. We have our resident owner here, John Green. John, how would this affect the way you go into shopping Keeneland September?
I think it's a great addition. I think anytime you can get people more information, the better. And then you let them disseminate what's important and what's not, how they're going to use it. But the main thing is, as a potential buyer, as a potential end user, without the ability to actually be on the ground and looking at horses physically, it's so important to at least get a preliminary idea of what some of these phenotypes look like when you're looking at the catalog page. So I think it's a great idea. I'm happy that Keeneland is doing it. And again, as an end user, I'm excited to be able to use that tool. And as a seller, I'm excited that my Book 1 and Book 2 horses, the ones that are really going to carry the load for us, hopefully from a sales standpoint, are going to have a chance to get recognized and get out there before people even step foot on the grounds.
Right. Gotcha. Also want to give a shout out to Keeneland for the local community efforts they're doing. They're doing Nourish Lexington and Nourish the Backstretch, which is partnering with local charities to make sure that people who are food insecure in Lexington and on the backstretch get fed during this time. So I want to give a shout out to them and Keeneland supporting their community. All right, so the news this week, obviously, we'll start with the Arkansas Derby. We finally had a big 3-year-old race to watch, and 2 actually. And so that was really exciting. Really good race on Friday as well in the Fantasy. Swiss Skydiver, kind of an overlaid 16-1. Venetian Harbor, all the money poured in on her. Pretty much just a match race between those two. And Swiss Skydiver wore down Venetian Harbor. Maybe the layoff got to her late. But we'll focus on the Arkansas Derby. I think my main takeaway was that while both Bob Baffert horses were brilliant, I think the only one we really learned anything about was Nadal, because Charlatan the race played out the way it figured on paper, which was that he had the rail draw. If he broke sharply, he'd be on an uncontested lead. The pace was faster than I thought. I didn't think he would go that fast. He went 22-4, 46 flat. So he really kind of ran them off their feet. But we already knew he was brilliant. So I don't think we really found that much out about him other than that he could do it against top flight competition. But I think, this was the weaker division of the Arkansas Derby. Later on, he's going to face even tougher horses than that, like legitimate grade 1 horses, probably going to have a pace fight on his hands at some point. I think we'll learn more about him then. But obviously a brilliant performance. But Nadal, he was the one that showed you something new, showed you a new gear, showed you a new dimension. And he was able to sit off the pace because Wells Bayou was hard set and bent on the lead, made the lead pretty clearly. Nadal still had a good trip. He still had an out in the clear stalking trip. So it wasn't like he overcame any kind of serious negative circumstances. But the fact that he was able to relax and then pounce and then kick away. I think that shows you he's a more complete horse than we had seen thus far. He also won by open length margin for the first time. I guess he did that in his debut, but in his 2 stakes races before that, he had really been tested and only won by 3/4 of a length or so. So I think we learned more about him. We're going to learn more about Charlatan down the line. And now it's just a matter of Bob Baffert keeping them both sound and happy up until the Derby. We're going to talk a little bit as the calendar opens up what 3-year-old races he might be able to look forward to. I'll open it up to you guys. What were your impressions of Saturday?
Let's take one at a time, Joe, and all good points about Nadal. The reason why it was so important that he rated off the lead was not just because of the Arkansas Derby, but because of the bigger picture. And if you think about it, right now, the biggest threat to Bob Baffert losing the Kentucky Derby is that Bob Baffert's horses get into a speed duel. And you have Authentic also in the mix as one of the big 3. He, too, is a fast horse that looks like he wants to have the lead. So now Rosario takes this horse off the pace. Nadal relaxes very nicely. He was second early, but it looked like he could have relaxed him in third, fourth early if he really wanted to. So that was a big move forward, not just in the fact that he won, but the fact that he ran a different kind of race, and that's got to make Baffert very happy. Now, to Charlatan now, I hear what you say about he didn't prove a whole lot, which is true. Really an easy field compared to the second one. He gets to the lead, goes his kind of trip that he always gets. But my point to that is, what more could he have done? And I see that some people are kind of discounting him a little bit. For instance, I was surprised that he was not number 1 in the NTRA poll of all the 3-year-olds out there. And, the horse can't win by 25 lengths. He can't, run a 130 buyer every single time out. I think we have to take things a little bit more on face value. This was his first race ever in stakes competition, and he went out and won by 6 lengths. I mean, what's not to like about that? But yes, in future races for him, Charlatan, we'll probably learn more. But right now, I'm very high on Charlatan. I put him as my number 1.
No, excellent point, Bill. And we're still, even though it's the first week of May, we're still 123 days away from the Kentucky Derby. So what you have to picture this in this brave new world is these races time-wise are the equivalent of, when the Jerome ran in January, or the Sham, the January races. So Bill, you're 1,000% correct. You don't want these horses to win by 15, 20, 25 lengths if they could, and blow their minds and basically not have enough time to, peak into September, because the calendar is different now. I mean, that you really have to think of it as if these races are happening, 3 months away from the big dance, from the important one. That being said, you have to be really excited about Charlatan and Nadal's races. And the only person that's more excited about their races today is me, because we're going to be interviewing Bob Baffert later on today and talking to him about not only these 2 horses, but the other horses that he has in his very talented stable. So you're going to need to keep me on the ground a little bit today during the course of this show, because I'm just so excited to talk to him about these talented horses and just how he's going to get them to peak in September.
Is it more exciting than sitting here next to me on this chat?
It is only because I can't touch you, Al. I can't. You're physically too far away. I can't poke you.
I agree. I was more impressed with Nadal. You didn't learn much about him in the Rebel, just getting out there. I mean, he did show a fair amount of grit in that race, but to switch off the way he did and then finish up the way he did, that to me is the difference between the 2 races. The fractions were substantially the same, but Nadal's come home time was much better than Charlatan. Now, who knows what Charlatan had left in the tank? He might have had plenty left. You have to question a little bit Charlatan's by Speightstown. I tweeted out that Speightstown can get you a 1.25 mile horse. He's done that. And his dam side, certainly a Quiet American mare who was very, very classy. So the potential is there. I think he needs to learn how to sort of turn off and switch off just a little bit to stay the 10, and we'll see what happens. But hey, it was great to see Grade 1 action on the racetrack.
It's great to see John being a total fanboy about Bob Baffert.
I'm so excited. You could ask my wife. I was like all geeked out last night when we found out that we were going to interview him. I said, "Well, can I ask him about this?" And she's like, "Just you're only going to have 2 questions. So just relax. Just take a chill pill on this. The other thing that I was really excited about, though, since we're talking about racing, which is really exciting, is the performance of Swiss Skydiver. And not only did she win the fantasy, but she actually ran faster than the boys. She actually ran, her mile time was a fifth to 2/5 faster than Nadal and Charlatan. So, and she ran a 99 buyer, so really we're talking about the boys and how impressive it is for the Kentucky Derby. But how about that filly? The impressive win that she had. And I think you mentioned before, Joe, she and Venetian Harbor just kind of dominated that race. But Swiss Skydiver to run a 99 buyer and to run a mile in 1:35 and 1 is just, is mind blowing to me.
She's an interesting horse because she's kind of turned, the light bulb was turned on for her in the last two races. She was a horse that showed a lot of promise. First out, she had a really nice win coming from way back, and she had rallied in her next three starts. Didn't run that well at Fairgrounds when she was third behind Finite and British Idiom, but then went to the lead in the Gulfstream Oaks for the first time and really dominated that field and really took it to Venetian Harbor on Friday from the jump. Nobody else could really run with them early. So I think she's an interesting horse. She's developing for Ken McPeak. He does a really good job. I did a story with him last year at the Breeders' Cup. He does a really good job of finding these bargain buys. She was only a $35,000 Keeneland September graduate. So he's done this a lot with a lot of cheaper horses. And it sounds like with not that many definite spots for 3-year-old fillies to point to right now, he's considering setting her to Royal Ascot. Al, do you have more on that?
Bill could probably speak more to, but he was talking about the English 1,000 guineas as a stepping stone to whatever else later in the year. But Bill, I'll defer to you on this one. You spoke with Ken.
One correction real quick, Joe. The race that we're talking about for Swiss Skydiver is at Newmarket, not at Royal Ascot. It's part of the English Filly Triple Crown, a huge race. And he had a very interesting, very exciting filly right now. As John pointed out, the buyer number for her was better than the boys for the Arkansas Derby. And, Venetian Harbor probably did run her race. There's a horse that everybody was talking about, that she was the second coming of who knows what. And the reason why I say that is because it was 10.5 lengths back to the horses in third. And there were some pretty good horses back there. So far as Swiss Skydiver, the big question would be whether or not she can run on the grass. And, that's going to be sort of something that I don't know if McPeak can know himself until she goes over there and possibly does it. Now, we don't know that she's definitely going to go there. But if you think about it right now, if you look for the next month and a half, what is out there for 3-year-old fillies? You could say the same thing for the 3-year-old colts, and maybe that's a thing that we could now talk about. Where are all these horses going to go? The only race out there for both divisions right now that we know for certain is June 6th at Santa Anita, when it's going to be the Santa Anita Derby and the Santa Anita Oaks on the same day. McPeak told me that he wasn't really interested in going to Santa Anita for the Oaks. And, maybe he's going to go on this great adventure. And, people think of Wesley Ward doing so well over in England. Well, Ken McPeak has yet to win a race over there, but he's gone over a half dozen times or so. So, it's something that is really in his ballpark, and he knows how to do it, and has had some horses run very well. It'd be really exciting if she went over there. That'd be fun.
It would be cool. And it's interesting. I think the reason that Wesley Ward has had so much success is that, in terms of the entire world, I don't think anybody prepares a 2-year-old early in their season as well as Wesley Ward. I think he's world class when it comes to that. The 3-year-old fillies obviously are much further along. I think it'd be interesting. The only other horse that I've seen in recent memory that went over there with any success was Tepin. Obviously, she's a Hall of Fame talent. So, I always salute people for trying new things, especially as American turf racing continues to grow and, improve in quality. I always support these guys trying to take a shot and go to Europe, because your European friends, they look down on American turf horses. I'm tired of it, man. I thought Tepin would strike the fatal blow, but I think they still looking down on us.
Yeah. Well, don't tell Andy Serling what you just said. He probably wouldn't approve of that. But I think it's a sporting. The interesting thing is that our horses more than hold their own when the Europeans come over for Breeders' Cup, and I understand that Europeans are coming to play on our home turf, and it's a different ball of wax traveling over there. And I think more than the way these horses class up is just the configuration of the tracks, like, an uphill finish or undulating courses. And that may be the fly in the ointment where it comes to our horses going over there. But But Tevin handled that straight mile, and she was all out to do it. But listen, I'm on your side, Joe. I'd like to see it happen.
What does Andy not like?
Oh, he doesn't like our horses going over there to burn spots at home. Why do that?
All right. There's not enough graded stakes in America.
Yeah.
No, I mean,
and the other thing, just from a mating standpoint with Swiss Skydiver, obviously Daredevil's, this is one of his first crops, not his first crop, and they have been winning on the turf. And then she's out of a Johannesburg mare, which again, you would think would be able to do both surfaces kind of equally as well. So it doesn't surprise me that, a son of More Than Ready is throwing horses that can run basically on any surface, because that's what he did. I mean, he basically threw horses that could run on the dirt and the turf and, the synthetic and broken glass. So it wouldn't surprise me if this filly had the ability to go over and run on an undulating turf course or on a on a yielding turf course if that's what it comes out to be, because she just looks very athletic and very quick.
Yeah. And I think Ken told you, Bill, that good horses can run on anything. I would agree with that. And yeah, John, I looked at Daredevil's pedigree last night, just Daredevil. And so he was a half brother to Albertus Maximus. So from a class standpoint, and obviously he was a very talented 2-year-old. And he does have some turf under his second dam himself. So for her to take to the turf would not be a surprise.
We'll be right back after this message from Keeneland. This week's news is sponsored by West Point Thoroughbreds. Owning a multiple graded stakes winning racehorse like Hard Not to Love is attainable with a racing partnership like West Point Thoroughbreds. Partnerships enable you to spread your ownership across several horses for less than it costs to own one horse alone. This increases your racetrack action and chances for a big horse. Check out why West Point Thoroughbreds is the gold standard in racing partnerships at westpointtv.com. So as we all are, West Point is eager for racing to ramp back up in Kentucky and California and New York. And in the meantime, they've been able to add 10 2-year-olds over the last 8 weeks. Pretty amazing support from their partners. Obviously, 2-year-olds always bring hope at this time of year. And I think that's something we all need a little bit of. All 10 have been fully subscribed from the West Point partners, and really is a ray of sunshine and optimism during this time. And, I spoke about it a couple of weeks ago, how much I love seeing the 2-year-olds on the track. We haven't seen that much of it. We've seen a little bit of it at Gulfstream, but as these tracks start to come back, we're going to see more and more of looking towards the future. And so we're glad that West Point has been able to restock with the babies, and we look forward to seeing them on the track soon. All right. So at long last, we have some good news to report on the coronavirus related racing shutdowns. Santa Anita has gotten the green light to go ahead and start racing. May 15th, Churchill is going to start at this point. On May 16th, Churchill is opening the barn area. On May 11th, they're doing something that's pretty smart. I think they're letting horses back in phases. I think first it's Fairgrounds, and then maybe Florida, and then the Mid-Atlantic, and then everybody else. So I think that's smart, so they can really supervise and analyze everybody that's coming back into the racetrack. Obviously, great news for everybody, great news for us, great news for owners, trainers, everybody that has been, kind of on pause here for a little bit. I think that these states have gone about it the smart way. I think that Kentucky maybe has been a little bit overly cautious, but I think that's where you should err when it comes to this kind of thing. California, I think, has done a really good job. And like John said, we're going to talk to Baffert about the efforts of the protests to try to get Santa Anita open back up. Who knows if that had any effect, but I think it couldn't hurt. So now we're going to have 2 major tracks opening up in the next couple of weeks. There's a lot of big stakes races that people are going to want to get into. My feeling is that New York is probably about a month behind where Kentucky and Santa Anita are, just because it's obviously been worse here than anywhere else in terms of the virus. It is on the downslope right now, but I think government officials are going to be overly cautious in the epicenter. So super excited about that and to have racing to look forward to. I want to get into some specific questions about it, but let's just hear the general reactions from you guys about racing coming back to these big markets.
Well, it's now finally some light at the end of the tunnel. And there's a couple other racetracks, Joe, that look like they're going to be up and running soon as well. I think Woodbine will be fairly soon. Lone Star Park looks like they're getting racing back right around the corner. And a couple others that are sort of, looking as if it's not going to be very much longer before they get going. But what is important right now is the so-called Big Three. And that would be, of course, Santa Anita, Churchill, and Naira. This time of year, I wouldn't put Gulfstream in that category with the championship meet over. So far as Naira goes, I know that they're hoping to race before June 1st. But as you mentioned, things are still in a pretty bad situation here in the Northeast, particularly in New York. But they would like very much to run, and I think they're hoping to run by Memorial Day weekend. One of the things that's going to be very interesting about this going forward, especially with Naira, what on earth are they going to do with their stake schedule? Because June 6th is Belmont Day in the traditional year. It's not just Belmont. I mean, there's a whole host of other stakes races on the card, the Acorn, the Met Mile, et cetera. I can't imagine they're going to run them all on June 6th, if in fact they're back June 6th. So everybody's asking what's going to happen to the Belmont Stakes? When will it be run? Will it be a 1.1 miles? Will they stick to the 1.5 miles? And now the question is, what's going to happen to all these other races? That's going to be fascinating. And, that's above my pay grade. There's no easy path or obvious way to put these stakes races in the book and say, okay, we're going to have this on July 4th weekend, and we're going to have this a weekend before Saratoga, et cetera. So it'll be interesting. We're looking at this sort of in two stages. Who's going to reopen? And when they do reopen, what are their stake schedules going to be so far as, grade 1, grade 2 competition?
Yeah, and Bill, just to piggyback on what you were saying about Naira, I know that NIFA sent out a press release, I believe, just a couple of days ago, saying they were applying for reopening on May 23rd. I think they're hoping also that if it's not Memorial Day weekend, that it'll be soon after. It'll be like the weekend of the 28th. But they are preparing the barn area and trying to make sure that trainers have an understanding of what the protocol would be if they shipped horses in. I don't know if they're going to do it the same way that Churchill Downs is doing it, where it's so regimented of, horses from this geographic location come in on this day, horses from another geographic location come in on a separate day. But I think they're just trying to make a plan to figure it all out and kind of work backwards from one of those two weekends. It was really good news to see that Laurel actually pulled their condition book off of the websites. And the theory is that they pulled it off the websites because they're actually going to redo their upcoming condition book, not only to show what races are going to be run once they're up and going in full force, but also what the purses are going to be. And I know that's something that we're going to talk about maybe a little bit later, but it's one thing for the racetracks to open and for them to have racing, but what are these purses going to look like, especially for the racetracks that are so dependent on getting additional monies from the casinos?
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled. Obviously, from the perspective of a fan, I'm thrilled for the trainers, big and small, who are shut down for all intents and purposes right now, to be able to regain some cash flow. I'm happy for the owners who've been locked out to be able to run their horses at real live racetracks. So, hey, West Virginia's coming back too. I mean, curiously enough, I think they're supposed to be back at Charlestown on the 14th. They do not have a condition book up yet.
Right. And Mountaineers the 22nd.
31st, I think.
31st? Okay, 31st.
Yeah. I was I was interested to see purse levels in the books at Santa Anita and Churchill. And as far as I can tell, Santa Anita is pretty much the same. Main specials, 50,000. And I think Churchill is slightly lower than what they did last year. But those purses were massive, but we're talking 80 for one other van allowances. So it's good that the money is there, and it'd just be great to have big league racing.
Yeah, I want to piggyback also off of what Bill said. I think it really is going to be really interesting to see how these horses are campaigned going forward, because I think at least one of the things that I get frustrated about as a racing fan is that it seems like trainers have these regimented maps planned out for their horses. And obviously other trainers and other owners hear about that when it comes to top horses, and then they can plan a separate course. And I think that's part of the reason you don't see a lot of top horses meeting each other other than the very, very top level of racing. I think now with the ambiguity in the stake schedule, I think there's going to be a lot of shuffling and a lot of horses facing each other early in the year that we probably would not have seen run against each other until the Breeders' Cup. So I agree that it's going to be really fascinating to see how this all shakes out. And people are going to need to get races into their horses. It's almost June. Most horses would have started by now, would have started at least by April or so at Keeneland. So I think that part is going to be really interesting. And I think it's going to lead to a lot of really good racing. And I think that's kind of one of the silver linings of this situation, is that with the racing calendar so condensed and so many fewer stakes races, you're going to see a lot of really good battles in places you maybe would not have seen them before. I wanted to segue from that into the 3-year-old calendar, because obviously Bill mentioned the Santa Anita Derby. That's the other big one that's coming up right now. But trying to think of what else might be on the calendar in the way of races people can get their 3-year-olds in before the Derby. And I'm thinking about the Matt Wynn at Churchill, which is usually on Stephen Foster night. I think that might have an increased purse by the time they run it. It's still a grade 3. Monmouth is trying to start July 4th, so we'll see if they can run the Haskell on the schedule. Trying to think, is there any other than the Belmont and the Peter Pan? We'll see. Belmont will probably have a 3-year-old stake somewhere in there when they start back up, but other than that, it seems a little dry until the summer. What do you guys think?
Yeah, it is dry, and that's because right now we would be in the middle of the Triple Crown, and nobody schedules a major 3-year-old race to compete with the Triple Crown races. One thing I think is all but certain is that NYRA is going to have some sort of race. If you think about it, it doesn't have to be the Belmont Stakes. It very well could be the Wood Memorial. And there's no reason why that couldn't be run at Belmont after being canceled. Run it at 1 1/8 would be around 1 turn. It would be kind of a very strange Wood Memorial because of the 1 turn aspect and, of course, the timing. But I think NYRA is definitely going to have something in its schedule when they do open up, say, the last couple of weeks in May or early June. And I think the Wood Memorial is one candidate. The other candidate is the Belmont Stakes. We've talked about this on the podcast before about if you run the Belmont in the middle of October, what a blah event that could be, especially if no horse is going for the Triple Crown. I mean, you literally could have 9,000 people in the stands. Does NYRA really want to go through with that? So there are 2 options right there. The Haskell scheduled for July 18th, I believe is the date at Monmouth. So that's another race. But other than that, I don't really know. I don't think there's going to be a ton of options for people to get these horses ready for the 3-year-old classics whenever they would be run. Another option, of course, would be the Travers. Right now, it's 1 week before the new Kentucky Derby on September 5th. NYRA hasn't said as much, but you have to think they're definitely going to change that on the calendar and run it earlier on the meet at Saratoga to make it a traditional prep or a very untraditional prep for the Kentucky Derby.
Yeah, and you have a couple of those state derbies, Iowa Derby, the Indiana Derby, the I'm going to call it the Texas Derby, although it's really the Texas Derby at Lone Star. Those are all $300,000 to $500,000, graded stake races. I think the Texas Derby is a listed stake, but for the most part, those would be the ones that are currently on the calendar. But there's going to be a lot of juxtapositioning of these major races coming in because they still have to come up with a point system, for them, because that's still the way that these horses are going to get, validated and ultimately entered into the Kentucky Derby is by having points. So it's one thing also to have the races, but then how do you figure out, what to do with the points? If this was January, then the races that just ran would be 10-pointers, but the Arkansas Derby were 100-pointers. So do you go backwards in points? Do you keep the point total, at 100 now? Because that's the current marker for a grade 1. I don't know. I mean, we're just kind of in uncharted waters, like we've been saying, time and time again. But I think first and foremost, the tracks have to get open. The tracks have to decide what they're going to do with their signature 3-year-old race. Are they going to run them even? Because they may just say, we're hurting so much in purse money that we can't afford to write a big race like that, especially in competition with 3 other, Derby preps. So maybe we just kick this one down the road this year and put it on hold. and put the money into the other races that are kind of either secondary races or for 3-year-old fillies? I don't know what the answer is yet.
Yeah, John, you just made a good point, and about would they even have these races? And there are going to be some discussions about this. I mean, nobody's going to get rid of the Travers or the Haskell, but as per what you just said, it was announced yesterday that Louisiana Downs. I know the Super Derby is nothing like it used to be, but it still is a 3-year-old graded stakes race. And they announced that they are not going to have it this year as a cost-saving measure. And a lot of horsemen's groups are obviously going to go to management and say, look, if you're going to cut purses on us 35, 40%, maybe even more at some of these tracks that rely so much on the slot and casino revenue, then we just can't afford to have these kind of races this year. And I know it's normally run very late in the year so far as, the 3-year-old progression goes. But I'll give you a race that right now I would bet is not going to happen in 2020. And that's the Pennsylvania Derby. Where does it possibly fit in the schedule? And, Parks is one of those tracks. I mean, their purses are going to be obliterated if they don't get the casinos open in Pennsylvania anytime soon. And nobody thinks that's going to happen. So, yeah, I'm saying right now, I'm looking in my crystal ball, no Pennsylvania Derby in 2020.
That's a great point, Bill. I didn't even think about that. You're exactly right. That whole stake, because I think Parks announced that they canceled their entire stakes, the Pennsylvania bred stakes calendar for the rest of the year in a cost-saving measure. So I think you're exactly right.
I'm a glass half full kind of guy, so I could see a situation where Parks positions the Derby and the Cotillion as Breeders' Cup preps and runs them the second week of October. Say, I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that has to fall into place, but I mean, I'm kind of surprised at this point, and maybe I'm not, but I mean, the fact that they haven't gotten together and announced when the Triple Crown and how and what sequence it's going to run. There's been discussion of Belmont going 9 furlongs. I can't imagine that happening. But I've always just thought that you run the Derby September 5th, you run the Preakness September 19th, run the Belmont at 1.5 miles on October 5th or 6th, and you got 4 weeks of the Breeders' Cup. To me, that makes perfect sense. I also think that on the NYRA schedule, you could do something like move the Jim Dandy from Saratoga, put it at the end of Belmont, run the Travers 4 weeks before the Derby, and have that as your stepping stone to the Derby. And then, Joe, one other thing: the Matt Winn is on May 23rd. I believe it's 100. And
it's going to get Derby points, though. I think they announced that it's going to be 10 points for the winner.
Okay. It's a $100,000 race, and I believe Maxfield is expected to come back there. So some interest there.
Maxfield is just a myth in my mind. He doesn't actually exist. It's been so long since I've seen him. But yeah, it's an interesting discussion about the Triple Crown. I agree with Al that probably makes the most sense in terms of September 19th and then 3 weeks later having the Belmont. There's, like I said, it's going to be such a scramble to get all of these horses into all these stakes. I don't know if it's going to work out that clean cut. I know that Churchill probably put the Derby there so that they would give these other Triple Crown races a bit of room to breathe. But, I wanted to transition from this into Bill's story from yesterday about Maryland and Maryland racing, and they're not alone in having their purses drastically cut because of the lack of casino revenue. And some of these tracks have 70% of their purse revenue coming from casinos. And as we all know, casinos are going to take longer to open up than racetracks. And who knows if they're even open the rest of the year at any point. So that's a major issue. And it factors into the Preakness, because I was reading the story and Bill talked to Tim Keefe, and I'll let him expand on it. But they are canceling the stake schedule at Laurel because their thought is, if the purse money that we do have, we're going to use it for the local guys. We're not going to use it. It makes sense to take care of the guys that are here funding Maryland racing and filling the stables all year long, and not guys that are just shipping in to get the stakes money on Preakness Day. They talked about possibly not running the Preakness this year, though I don't think that's been considered. Bill, what were your impressions?
Yeah, I used Maryland and talked to Tim Keefe, and I wanted to write about them because, first of all, there was some news coming out of Maryland. They sent out a Q&A to all the members of the Horsemen's Group, talked about things about changing claiming rules, about restricting racing, at least in the beginning, to no shippers, only Maryland, only guys. but they are representative of a phenomenon that's probably going to occur in the sport, is what is going to happen to these tracks that rely so heavily on casino and slot revenue. And I think everybody's been so eager to get these tracks back running, they haven't been able to ask themselves that question. Now, California right now is fine. And they are the only major racetracks in the country right now that don't rely heavily on casino revenues. So everybody kind of falls into different categories and different divisions. NYRA's casino revenues from the Resorts World at Aqueduct make up about 35% of the purses at the New York racetracks. Then in between, we have Maryland, where they do bet a good amount of money on the races, but the casino revenue, there's no casinos at Laurel and Pimlico, but the casino industry in Maryland has to contribute to the purses. Tim Keefe told me it's nearly 70% of the purses for Laurel. Now, you take then tracks like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, et cetera. I don't know the exact figures, but I would guess it would be in the 90s so far as how much casino revenue contributes to the purses. So, what are these tracks going to do going forward? Well, the short-term answer would be we hope the casinos are going to reopen fairly soon. But, maybe they will in some states, but at least, looking around here and the kind of situation we have in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, et cetera, I don't think these casinos are going to be open for several months. And when they do open, they're talking about, you have to shut down every other slot machine so that people aren't next to one another. There's social distancing, maybe having, a table that holds 6 blackjack players, only allow 3 people to play, et cetera. So what are the casino revenues going to be when, in fact, these casinos do start opening again? So, there's no easy answer, but you're going to see purses, I think, drastically reduced at some, if not most, of the racetracks in the country as they weather out the storm and hope to get the casinos back. I mean, it shows what a problem it is for horse racing to be so reliant on stupid slot machines. But I suppose that's a discussion for another day.
It could be today. We can talk about this every week. Okay. That's how big of a deal it is.
John? Well, Joe, it's a huge deal. And, again, I didn't know we were really going to go into this, but, and this is like, something that Pat Cummings has talked about before, and we've had him on the podcast. This shows the kind of situation that racing is in and the problems with relying on a separate revenue source to prop this game up. And look, I hope I'm wrong about this, but 10 years from now, 2030, are we talking about finally the cord has been cut and all these slot machine places have gone off on their own and we have decoupling? And then nobody's getting any kind of slot revenue. And where on earth is horse racing when this happens? Again, I don't want to be all gloom and doom and talk about Armageddon and everything, but since we brought it up and we're talking about this subject, this is something that racing is going to have to deal with eventually. And I don't know what the answer is. I don't think there is any answer.
And one thing that the coronavirus has proven to everybody is that it is the ultimate stress test. It's the ultimate stress test on our economy. It's the ultimate stress test on our individual psyche. And it's the ultimate stress test on our industry, on horse racing. And if horse racing can't handle itself on its own merits and with its own revenue, then maybe some of these racetracks should go by the wayside of, the Rockingham Parks and the Suffolk Downs and some of the racetracks that when I was growing up, I loved going to and watching horses, compete at. Maybe they just don't belong to be here anymore. And it turns out to be where we're down to, 8 or 10 super tracks. And we have, the flip side, the positive is we have the kind of races that we've enjoyed at Gulfstream the past couple of weeks, or we have the kind of races that we've had at Oaklawn the past couple of weeks, where it's forcing operations to, go against the best of the best and run for more money, but go against the best of the best earlier in the process, where, these graded stake races really have some depth and some meaning to them. And maybe that will, help the breeding industry down the road, because the horses that do get graded stakes performances at that point, graded stakes placed, are like legitimately graded, and therefore their progeny, may have a little bit better. They may be a little bit better than the previous generation's grade 3 placed horses. I'm just hypothetically, but in the supply and demand of the world that we live in, sometimes it's okay for some of these operations to fail.
Yeah, like maybe contraction is a good thing. Just fewer opportunities, but a richer, more high quality product. But there are also smaller tracks that rely on casino revenue, Indiana, Iowa, and what's going to happen with the fairgrounds when if they come back, next November? How will the shutdown of their slot parlor, how will that impact their purses and quality of racing? So I think that remains to be seen as well.
I'm glad that you guys brought up consolidation and contraction, because I feel like I'm usually banging that drum, and I don't want to be the monster advocating for tracks to close in the middle of a pandemic. But I think, it's just, there's too few horses for too many tracks. And I think that's an existential problem for the sport. Kind of wanted to use that to segue into the handle numbers from yesterday that came out, where total pari-mutuel handle during the month fell by 24.42%. Pretty unsurprising with fewer tracks running and fewer horses running overall. Average handle by race day increased, obviously, because there's less competition. But the number that I really focused on was field size. Field size, which is 7.55, which was 7.55 last year, which is abysmal when you compare it to the global racing landscape, was up to 9.13, which is unheard of in American racing. It's not. It's commonplace across the world, but in American racing, having an average field size above 9 is just like groundbreaking stuff. And so the obvious conclusion to this is that fewer tracks running, bigger fields, better quality stakes racing. And it's just, I don't know, this, like I said, I don't want to, advocate for people losing their jobs or losing their livelihoods or anything, but I think consolidation and moving to, these bigger hubs of racing where there's 1 or 2 tracks instead of 4 or 5, I think overall that's the inevitable course of racing, and that these tracks that are just getting propped up by slot revenue are not going to be able to survive long term, because even past the pandemic, we saw what was happening in Pennsylvania with the governor starting to raid that slots money for education. I think more governors are going to start to realize that, and they're going to try to go for that money. So I just think it's better for the sport in general. If we have consolidation over time, it shouldn't happen overnight. It should be a transition. But I don't think there's any other conclusion to draw that the product will be better and it'll be more sustainable if we have fewer tracks running.
And Joe, just in sheer economics, there's a reason why economic trends, especially bull markets, last 7 to 8 years. And it's because eventually, things get too fat and too many businesses are being run, and they're run inefficiently, and that begets, more losses, and then the trend goes backwards. Now, we've had this, you can make an argument, we've had this current bull market for a decade now, okay? It just can't be sustainable. So eventually we're going to have to pull back and have a recession. That means people are going to lose jobs, and people are going to, not be able to speculate and buy real estate or put money into the market or things like that. But it's just a natural occurrence. We haven't really had that in the horse industry as far as racetracks go. We've had that with farms, building and falling. We've had that with the foal crops being very robust in the mid 30,000 foals being born, down to where we are right now in the low 20,000 foals being born. And there's a reason why, because economically, it's not a feasible equation. Well, you can take that same stress test and put it towards some of these racetracks. And I grew up right outside of Monmouth Park. You can almost see it from my house. I'm that close to it, and I'm that emotionally close to it because all of my great memories in racing, especially early on, occurred at Monmouth Park. But Monmouth has been very good at being able to kind of dodge bullets and being able to get deals done and prop up one more meet, and hopefully that'll get this done, and then one more meet, and that'll get the sports book, and one more meet. Well, that may, unfortunately, Monmouth may be on the short list of racetracks that don't make it through this pandemic because of the contracts they have, and they've done everything they can to try to keep themselves in business. But sometimes it just doesn't work. Sometimes you have to just kind of fall by the wayside and say, we gave it our best shot. We gave it every opportunity possible. And I'm not picking on Monmouth because there's other racetracks that are kind of in that ilk. And I really hope that Monmouth survives again for a lot of personal reasons. But I just don't see it having the equation, the economic equation, and the ability to compete with some of these other racetracks once we get through this stress test of the pandemic. So contraction may really be the way to go for a lot of these racetracks. And the positive will be the bigger fields, the deeper fields, not only in regular claiming races or allowance races, but as you mentioned, these stake races that have 10, 12, 14 overfilled horses, overhorse fields, in these races. We just ran in a $75,000 added stake race, overnight stake, basically at Gulfstream. And there were 14 in, and there were like half a dozen excluded. And that was with Proven Strategies who ran in the Breeders' Cup. So nobody, everyone was like, we have to run. We need to run to get a chance to make some money with these horses. So I think that once we kind of get the whoosh of the economic impact of coronavirus, that some of these tracks just won't be around anymore. But I think the overall product will be much, much better for the average person in the industry.
Agreed. I think, like you said, this is a stress test. This is a time of adaptation for everybody, for individuals in terms of how they live their lives and how they interact with each other, and for businesses who are going to have to adapt and, work from home more and that kind of stuff. And it's an adaptation time for everybody. And racing has not done a good job over the years of adapting to the times. And I think that that's evident in there being so many tracks that are artificially propped up by the casino industry, and so many tracks and so few horses with declining foal crops and that kind of stuff, declining ownership. I think that on their own, the sport has not coped with the reality of the situation. And I think that this whole thing is a kind of way of driving home reality and exposing cracks in industries and cities and government and business. I just think that this is something that is going to lead to change in the sport, whether the powers that be like it or not. And I think overall, it's going to drift towards something that's a better product and better and more sustainable long term.
Is this when we announce that we're contracting to three guest hosts in the show?
We're tightening our belts first here at the Writers Room. We're voting John off the island.
Believe me, by popular demand. There's no surprise there.
Joining a West Point Thoroughbreds partnership can vault you into the world of instant camaraderie among people surrounding high-class horses and stakes action for a fraction of the cost of trying to do it on your own. Learn more at westpointtb.com. We'll be right back after this message from West Point Thoroughbreds. The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by The Green Group, an accounting, tax consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. With over 500 clients in the horse business, they have proven strategies to save you taxes. For more information on how they can help you, visit www.greenco.com. So we couldn't be more excited this week to bring in our Green Group Guest of the Week via Zoom, Hall of Fame trainer Bob Baffert. Thanks so much for joining us, Bob.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So obviously a huge weekend. Congratulations. Charlatan and Nadal in the Arkansas Derby. Gamine also looked really good. I know you have a little bit more time to soak this in than usual, but I know also that trainers are always thinking about what's next. The calendar is pretty foggy right now. What do you do with Charlatan and Nadal in the next few months?
Well, I mean, with all the speculation out about when these races are I'm waiting to hear. We know the Derby. And today I heard rumors that maybe Preakness, October 3rd, maybe is being thrown around. Belmont, I'm not sure if they're going to run it in June or July. You're hearing all these different rumors. So, I was hoping it would have been, September and then run the Preakness and the Belmont like the way it's run every year. So it would, at least give it some, to keep the Triple Crown going the way it is. But, I just don't know. I'm like everybody else. But I'm going to back off these horses just a little bit. They run hard, they ship. So, and just look for something in June.
Would you consider running either of them in the Santa Anita Derby, or are you dedicated to giving them a little bit of a break?
They're not going to get much of a break. They're athletes. I have to keep them in tune. But I think the Santa Anita Derby, I am looking at Authentic right now. And if I were to run one of the two, it would be maybe Charlatan. He's lightly erased, where Nadal's had some pretty good battles, So, and he came out of it. They both came out fantastic. And as a matter of fact, they're just jumping out of their skin. They really handled everything really well. So they would have been so primed for the Derby this weekend and ready for the Preakness.
Hey, Bob, it's Bill Finley, and thanks for joining us. If I ask you which one of the three is the best, I get the same answer if I ask you which one of your children do you like the best. So I'm not going to bother to ask you that. But in your own mind, do you have a pecking order? Do you yourself, Bob Baffert, know which is the best of these horses?
Well, I know that three of them are all outstanding. I can't separate them. Look at Nadal and Charlatan. I mean, they were separated by a neck, whatever the time was, and one was being pushed a little bit, and the other one wasn't pushed at all. So they're all different. Their running styles are different. They're just three really top horses that have separated themselves, just like Tiz the Law, the way he separated himself in the Derby. So, Tiz the Law, Charlatan, Authentic, and Nadal, but Authentic, we'll see what he does going to mile and eighth, because you really don't know, Bill, until you go mile and eighth.
Bob, again, congratulations on all the success of this weekend. In the past, you've had great success at running in the Haskell, and obviously the Haskell is near and dear to all of our hearts because we're here in Monmouth County. Again, in the past, in a normal year, it's been the Triple Crown races, a little bit of a break, and then the Haskell. Do you feel like that you would use the Haskell maybe as a Derby prep this year instead of a post Triple Crown race?
I haven't really thought about it. I thought, of the horses, the Haskell, the first horse that pops into my mind would be a horse like Charlatan. His speed, he's got that, just that really quickness, high cruising speed. He leaves the gate. He never sees another horse the rest of the race. I like that. But Nadal would fit it also. So, what I do is I sort of have them ready, and I nominate everywhere. Whoever's doing great, that's who usually gets on the plane or goes somewhere. Fortunately, it worked out that they split that race, it was just, so thankful to the Sella family for, giving everybody a chance to run. And so, they got all the good horses out there. You can tell by the way they handle. Everybody was watching.
Hey, Bob, Alan Carasso, thanks again for being with us. I'm just curious from a physical or conformation standpoint, how Nadal, Charlatan, and we can toss in Authentic, how they are similar, or how they're different in terms of their builds.
Yeah, they're actually three totally different types of horses. Authentic is more he's a leaner, narrower, lighter framed horse, tall, more like an Arrogate type body, where Charlatan, he's like a longer version of his sire, Speightstown. Just beautiful hip on him, just incredible conformation, just beautiful conformation. And Nadal, he's 16'3", weighs 1,300 pounds. He's a brute. It's a brute of a horse, just a big. And you look at him, you would not think, how can that horse be so quick on his feet? But that's what makes them so. They're fast, and they have speed and more speed, all of them.
And does any of them remind you of any other horse that you've been down this road with before?
I think Nadal. I think he reminds me a little bit of Silver Charm. His grit, he's tough. What he did in the Rebel was, that was like a Silver Charm thing. Go out there, just pedal to the metal, turn for home. He just keeps going, never takes a deep breath. And Charlatan, he's like a smaller version of Justified, just quick off his feet. Adios. And Authentic, we're still trying to figure him out. He's sort of a immature type of horse. Never has really in any of his races just leveled off and just really put his mind to it. He's learning how to run. So I can see he's starting to mature, and he's a late foal. He was a May 5th foal. So we know he can run all day. He's just like a deer. He's like a gazelle. He just floats over the ground.
I wanted to ask a question about Charlatan. Al stole my thunder. I was going to ask about his comparison to Justified, who's over your right shoulder there. His breeding rights were picked up by Hillendale today, so shout out to the friends at Hillendale. But he's a horse who has been on the lead in all 3 of his races so far. I watched some of his morning workouts where you get him to relax off other horses and then kind of just blow them away. Do you think it's circumstance that has led him to be on the front end so far, and are you confident in his ability to rate going forward? Compared to Nadal, who's already shown he can do it?
Well, I mean, the reason he's been in the lead because he's just much faster than the horses he ran against. But at Oaklawn, he drew the 1 hole. So, when you're in the 1 hole inside shipping, I just told Martin Garcia, just get him away from there and just get him running and don't, there's no rating today. Just let him do his thing. And he knows how to handle these horses on the lead. So, he just got him out there and he just kept going. So keep him, when he turns for home, he's still a little green. So keep him, busy and keep nudging on him because I don't want, we want to make sure that he wins this race. I don't want anybody running him down. So, he's just, like a lot of horses that I've had, those really good ones, he's a speed horse. What if somebody hooks him? Well, you have to hook him first, he's so fast.
Right. Well, I asked because a lot of people are saying that the only way that you would lose the Derby is if all 3 of your horses hooked up in a speed duel. Do you train with that in mind at all, that they might cancel each other out at some point down the road?
No, Nadal is actually Rosario. Now that he's had those races under him, he actually could have. I told him he'll sit. He's a smart horse. He could probably sit. He could have been sitting 4th or 5th. We learned a lot about him, and that's what these preps. The thing about Nadal, he's had enough races now. Now we know what we can do. He can go to the lead, off the pace. He's handier. Where Charlatan, we don't know yet. We haven't tried anything with him. We haven't experimented in a race where, are you going to grab him? But in his works, he's worked with other horses and stayed right with him. But it depends on the distance. And I'm sure his next race will, find out more about him.
Hey, Bob, I have a theory about Charlatan. I want to see if you concur with this. You talked about how it would have been so nice to have the Kentucky Derby last Saturday with how well both him and Nadal ran. But keeping that in mind, it was only his 3rd lifetime start. He hadn't raced as a 2-year-old. Now, Justified put a lot of those questions to rest, but it's still difficult, obviously, for a horse with so lightly raced and so little experience to win a Kentucky Derby. How about over the next 4 months or so, can you make him better? And the reason I ask that is because you can now take your time. You don't have to rush him into anything. You can give him a couple more prep races. You can do what you want to do in the morning. So could the Charlatan of September be better and more seasoned than the Charlatan of the first Saturday in May?
Yeah, I really think he will get better. A lot of those fast horses like that. Take a horse like Bayern, for instance. He couldn't have done what Charlatan's doing. He was, extremely fast, had that speed, and by the time the fall rolled along, he could go a mile and a quarter. They change, and Nadal, I think he'll get better with age. I mean, all these horses that are in training right now are going to get better by September, and so now we sort of know where we are with them and figuring out their style. Like horse like Point Given, we didn't figure out his style till after the Derby when he got beat. And I think Charlatan, I still think where he can learn a little bit more in the mornings, teach him a little bit more. But right now we were in a hurry to get him through there and get that grade 1.
Bob, let me shift your focus for a second away from the 3-year-olds to one of the other really impressive horses you have in your barn that actually you just brought in, and that's Maximum Security. In that situation where you have all of these news stories about the horse and about the former trainer, how does that whole process begin of, them reaching out to you to say, here's our great horse, do with him as you please? Like, what protocol is involved? What do you anticipate for him going forward? I mean, it's a really unique situation, with you and the horse Maximum Security at this point.
Well, I mean, I Gary Mary West, and I have a great friendship with them. And Gary asked me if I would, take this horse. And I said, of course I'll do it for you. And so I look at it as a horse that I got from another trainer, or he just came off a layoff. And I just start like from scratch. And he just got in. He's a long ways from running right now. He just came in, he's been turned out. And so we're taking our time with him. But, Gary always tells me, you treat him like you own him yourself, and you get him ready and you run him when you think he's ready. So that's the way. There's no extra thinking that goes into it.
I want to ask you a question as a fellow parent. Having Bodie by your side for 2 Triple Crowns, I'm just wondering what that's meant to you. You went through a health scare several years ago in Dubai, and that gave you a chance to reflect on life in a broader sense. And now to go through 2 Triple Crowns, to win them with your boy by your side, what has that meant to you?
Well, actually, it was not only him, but my older boys. They'd never been they hadn't been there, and so it was one of those things where they're all there together. And Bodie is, I was watching that American Pharoah telecast the other day, and it shows that picture of him jumping up and down. They had a camera on him they zeroed it. It was, I mean, it's priceless picture of the excitement that that little boy had. And, he really, he understands what we go through. He feels the ups and downs that we go through. And so when these horses run, he's a lot like his mother. He has that emotion, that passion, and he has the passion of these horses. So to him, I'm just glad that I've been able to share that with my children. And so it's a lot of fun. It's like it's my reward in life.
To shift gears, I wanted to ask you about the protests that you were at last week at Santa Anita that are aiming to open the track for racing. And now the track will open for racing next weekend. It was impressive to see you and your wife out there and really kind of on the front lines for the people who have a lot less prominence and a lot less money than you do. Why do you think it was important for you specifically to be out there supporting those guys?
Well, I was there. There's this guy by the name of Oscar De La Torre who puts that together. Really works hard for the backstretch workers, and I give him all the credit. He asked me, "We're going to have this. Would you be interested?" I said, "Sure." And we went out there, and I was there advocating for the backstretch workers, because they're hard workers. They don't want to lose their jobs. And they have a clinic back there in the backside that is it's funded by pari-mutuel wagering. And if there's no money coming in, it's hard. It won't be able to continue on. So they and I thought it was, we got to hear our story, because our protocols, we've been great. We've been lucky. Nobody's been ill. And so there was just no reason for us not to be open. But then again, the supervisors in the health department, they got a lot on their plate. And so we just want to let them know that, I just wanted to show that I was there for them. I was there for the backside workers.
Hey, Bob, not only did you do the thing for the backside workers, but you also penned an editorial that ran in the Washington Post a couple weeks ago advocating for the Horse Racing Integrity Act. And could you just give some more thoughts on why you think that's important, and in general, what racing has to do to put the scandal in the past and now move on and tell the public, like, hey, this game really is clean and honest, and you got to believe in us?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where I'd like to see, like, every state sort of the same. You hear about, these different, there's different, every state has different policies. And so it gets confusing. So when somebody goes somewhere else and you see some positives are just by accident, or they didn't know the rules or whatever. But I just bring a little bit of awareness to it that, we need to clean up our act, and just let people know out there that we're trying to do something.
One of the best horses that you trained was Arrogate, and now his foals are just starting to hit the ground. Have you seen very many of them? And if so, can you give us an idea of how they look? I know they're mostly there. I guess they're just turned yearlings this year, and they're going to be big in the upcoming sales. What's your feeling with regard to any of the Arrogate foals that you've seen so far?
Well, I actually bred a couple of my own mares to them, and I actually have a beautiful Calbred filly out here in California that looks just incredible. And everything I've heard and seen is that they look a lot like he's putting a really good body on him, balanced, and he was just a tremendous racehorse. And he's got to hit. He's probably one of the greatest horses I've ever trained. I mean, we'll all remember the Dubai race is the most incredible to me. I always thought that's the closest I might come to a horse that might run with Secretariat, and that night, the way he ran. And so, they mean a lot to me. Pharaoh, I'd love to see Pharaoh just have a Derby winner and justify. His foals are just off the chart, I hear. And so it's one of those things where, you just, as a trainer, I'm like their dad. I want to see them do well, and I've had Fast, that good filly, they bred her to Justify. I want them to get the best mares possible.
Keeping in the auction vein, you enjoy the hubbub of thoroughbred auctions, yearling sales, and 2-year-old sales. How much are you missing attending the 2-year-old sales during this pause? And what's your sense of how the influx of 2-year-olds into your barn might be this year?
Well, we're getting them in a little bit slower than we would have, because it was a lot of, we're going through some very challenging times right now. So I think guys will get their 2-year-olds started a little bit later. But I'm not one to really get on them early, because I like to run them near the end of the summer and the fall. So they're all bred to go, they're not bred to go 5 furlongs, So, but I just think that these 2-year-olds sales, I'm glad they sort of backed off a little bit. But once we get running, then when you go to a 2-year-old sale, then you can go in there with confidence. All right, we know we're going to run. Right now, it's sort of tough to get anybody. I mean, I'm not going to call anybody right now and tell them, hey, we need to go buy some 2-year-olds. Nobody's thinking about that right now. Right now, we just got to get back to some normalcy here and get back to racing. We need to get back to racing.
And on that note, just before we let you go, as I mentioned before, Santa Anita is opening up next weekend. I think you guys did move the needle a little bit on that. Can you talk about, it's obviously been a tumultuous year and a half or so for Santa Anita. Can you talk about how good it'll be to get back racing at the great race place?
Yeah, it's been really, it's been a tough year for us. But, we've been pretty good. We've been pretty safe this year. I think the weather was very challenging last year, and we probably could have done a better job, all of us. And I think it's brought an awareness to everyone in racing, and so we're doing a better job of with these horses and every maintenance of the track and everything. So it's one of those things where we want to forget 2019 and 2020 and just move forward.
Yeah, I think we're all with you there.
Hey, Bob, well, everybody's focused on the Kentucky Derby. You might win the Kentucky Oaks as well, because you have a very nice, very well-bred horse by the name of Gamine, who ran on the Arkansas Derby card, won her second career race, a $1.8 million 2-year-old purchase. You could just give us your scouting report on her, and what do you think of her as an Oaks candidate?
Yes, she's a big, tall, elegant-looking filly. I really wanted to run her. I'd like to have run her like short couple times and then stretch her out, but I needed to get her in, and I wasn't going to get an allowance short at Oaklawn because her date wasn't good enough. There was over a month of horses, and so when that mile and 16 race came up, we put her in there, and the other filly, Speed, she really, gave us a run for it, but she came back great. And it just goes to show you when you can win against a really good filly, second time out. She's pretty special. We've always thought of her as a superstar. She can, I think she's pretty close to those 3-year-old colts. So I was glad to see her run so well. And, we have Michael Lund, who purchased her for all that money. He's been very patient, waiting, when's she going to run, but now with the Kentucky Oaks moving in September, she would have never made, I would have never been able to make the Kentucky Oaks this year. So, hopefully if she stays healthy and sound, she should be one of the top fillies.
Bob, can't thank you enough for taking out the time to talk with us. Really appreciate it. Stay safe and congratulations on a huge weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thanks, Bob.
Yeah.
All right.
The Green Group Guest of the Week is sponsored by The Green Group, an accounting, tax consulting, and advisory firm specializing in the thoroughbred industry. With over 500 clients in the horse business, they have proven strategies to save you taxes. As the Green Group Guest of the Week, Bob Baffert will receive a free 1-hour tax consultation. For more information, visit www.greenco.com. We'll be right back after this message from The Green Group.
The Green Group is widely recognized as the top-rated tax and accounting firm specializing in the horse business. Why do the top owners, breeders, pinhookers, and trainers trust the Green Group as their tax advisors? The difference is experience. Firm founder Len Green has over 4 decades of experience owning, breeding, and racing horses. First-hand knowledge gives Green Group clients proven tax and money-saving strategies. Visit the Green Group at www.greenco.com. The Green Group, proven strategies to save you taxes.
Before we sign off, I wanted to shout out Daniel Donahue, who was the owner who did I did an interview with a couple weeks ago for a piece where he was talking about getting out of the game and at least in America and transferring his interest to the UK. He kind of went scorched earth there, and I appreciate him for it because, like I've spoken about on the show before, it's important for us to keep the pressure on for this game to clean itself up because, the FBI indictments, the news of that washed away with the tide of the coronavirus. So we want to keep the pressure up. So I want to say thank you to him. He probably caught some flack from some people in the industry and also a bunch of other readers who wrote in and had specific complaints and specific stories about cheating and racing. We're gonna keep up the topic. It's obviously not going to be an every week thing, but I think overall there needs to be pressure on the sport to clean itself up because it hasn't done it, and the people in charge haven't done it for decades. So I think it's important for owners to speak out, and I appreciate everybody that reached out to me, especially Daniel. So we'll look forward to more owners speaking up in the future. That's going to do it for this episode of the TDN Writers Room, brought to you by Keeneland. The Keeneland September yearling sale will take place Monday, September 14th through Saturday, September 26th. Submit final entries to showcase your yearlings at the world's deepest and premier marketplace at september.keeneland.com. I want to thank Bill Finley, John Green, Alan Carasso, our Green Group Guest of the Week, Bob Baffert, our producer Patty Wolf, our editors Nathan Wilkinson and Anthony LaRocca, and our production coordinator Michelle Sobrino. I want you all to stay safe, and we will see you here next week.